The baby's cry cut through the December cold like a knife through my chest, because it sounded exactly like my daughter Emma's cry the night I lost her 3 years ago. My name is Jake Morrison, and I thought I knew what loss felt like. I thought I understood what it meant to fail someone who needed you most. But standing in the smoking ruins of the Whitmore Estate at 2:47 a.m. on December 23rd, holding a 6-month-old baby girl who should have been dead, I realized I didn't know anything at all. She was supposed to be impossible. The entire east wing had collapsed 20 minutes before we got inside. No one could have survived that inferno. Yet there she was, in what used to be the master bedroom, completely untouched by the flames, like someone had built a protective barrier around her crib. Around her tiny neck hung a diamond necklace that caught our flashlight beams like trapped stars. But it wasn't the diamonds that made my hands shake as I lifted her from that crib. It was the way she looked at me. Emma used to look at me like that, like I was her whole world, like I could fix anything. The same blue eyes, the same tiny fingers that gripped mine with impossible strength, the same trust that I'd already failed once before. Jesus Christ, Morrison, is that what I think it is? My partner Danny's voice cracked as his light hit the seal hanging from that necklace. A royal seal, European, the kind you only see in museums or history books about bloodlines that were supposed to be extinct. I should have handed her to Danny, should have called it in immediately, should have followed every protocol I'd sworn to uphold for 15 years. Instead, I did something I'd never done in my entire career. I lied to my team, to my department, and to myself. I told them I'd check her for injuries in the ambulance. But what I really did was steal her. Because in that moment, holding this impossible baby who'd survived an unsurvivable fire, wearing jewelry worth more than most people's houses, I made a choice that would either save us both or destroy everything I had left. I decided that sometimes protecting the innocent means becoming everything you've spent your life fighting against. 3 people died in that fire, but by morning, I'd learned they weren't the first to die protecting this baby, and unless I was very, very careful, they wouldn't be the last. Because whoever left her in that burning mansion didn't expect her to survive, and now that she has, they're coming for her. They're coming for my Emma. Yes, I call her Emma now, because some families are born and some are forged in fire. And I've already lost one daughter to my failures. I'll die before I lose another. This is the story of how far a broken man will go to protect the miracle that gave him a second chance at being a father. Even if it means running from royal assassins, uncovering secrets that powerful people have killed to protect, and learning that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is hope. If you've ever gotten a second chance you didn't deserve, if you've ever held something precious and fragile and sworn to protect it no matter what, hit that like button because this story is for you. Share in the comments if you believe some bonds are stronger than blood, and subscribe if you want to follow a father's desperate fight to keep the family fate gave him. Because Emma and I are going to need all the support we can get, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning. The ambulance doors slammed shut behind me, and for the first time in 15 years as a firefighter, I was truly alone with my lies. Emma, I'd already started calling her Emma in my head, lay sleeping in the medical transport carrier, her tiny chest rising and following with the kind of peaceful rhythm I'd forgotten existed in this world. The diamond necklace caught the overhead light, casting fractured rainbows across her perfect face. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from the cold December air that still clung to my gear, not from the adrenaline that should have been wearing off by now, but from the weight of what I'd just done. I'd lied to Danny, told him I needed to check her vital signs privately. I'd lied to Chief Martinez when he radioed for a status update. But the biggest lie was the one I was telling myself, that this was about protocol, about following proper procedure. The truth was simpler and infinitely more complicated. This baby had my dead daughter's eyes. Emma Morrison had died 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago. Sudden infant death syndrome, they called it, SIDS, as if giving it an acronym made it easier to swallow, made it less like a knife twisting in your chest every time you drew breath. She'd been 6 months old, just like this little girl. Same blue eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Same way of gripping my finger, like she was anchoring me to the world. My marriage didn't survive Emma's death. Sarah blamed me for working too many doubles, for not being there that night. Hell, I blamed me too. What kind of father chooses strangers over his own child? What kind of man prioritizes saving other people's families while his own falls apart? The baby stirred, making a soft sound that shot straight through my chest. I leaned closer, studying her face in the dim light. No burns, no smoke inhalation, no injuries at all. It was impossible. The room where I'd found her had been engulfed in flames for over an hour. The ceiling had collapsed, the walls had buckled. Yet her crib sat in the center of it all, like an island of safety in an ocean of destruction. Around her neck, that necklace gleamed with an otherworldly beauty. Each diamond was perfectly cut, probably worth more than I'd make in 5 years. But it was the seal that made my blood run cold. An intricate coat of arms that belonged to a European royal family I'd studied in college, the House of Valdres, supposedly extinct since World War II. The radio crackled to life. "Morrison, what's your ETA to memorial?" I stared at the sleeping baby, at this impossible miracle wearing impossible jewelry, and made an impossible choice. Instead of pressing the radio button, I reached over and turned it off. Then I leaned forward and tapped the driver's partition. "Change of destination," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Take us to 124-7 Maple Street instead. My address, my empty house, my chance at redemption." My house felt like a mausoleum. 3 years of avoiding anything that reminded me of Emma had turned it into a hollow shell, all hard surfaces and sharp edges, with nothing soft left to cushion the impact of memory. But carrying this baby across the threshold changed something fundamental in the air, like someone had finally opened windows that had been sealed shut for too long. I laid her on my kitchen table, still in the medical carrier, and for the first time really looked at what I'd done. Kidnapping, that's what they'd call it. Interfering with a criminal investigation? Theft of evidence. The baby was evidence now, wasn't she? Evidence of what? I didn't know yet, but something told me that necklace wasn't just expensive jewelry. It was a target painted on this child's forehead. The house phone rang, then my cell phone, then the house phone again. I let them all ring. Chief Martinez was probably losing his mind right about now, wondering where his most reliable captain had vanished to with a potential key witness. Danny would be covering for me, telling himself I'd lost track of time doing the medical assessment. But eventually, questions would turn into suspicions, and suspicions would turn into search warrants. I had maybe 6 hours before they came looking for me. 6 hours to figure out why 3 people had died protecting a baby who wore royal jewels, why someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to make her death look accidental, and why every instinct I'd honed over 15 years of emergency response was screaming that this wasn't over. The baby woke up as I was examining the necklace more closely. No crying this time, just those impossibly blue eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me feel exposed, like she could see straight through to all the broken places inside me. I'd forgotten how babies did that, how they looked at you like you were the answer to every question they'd never learned to ask. "Hey there, little one," I whispered, my voice rougher than I intended. "What kind of trouble have you gotten us both into?" She made a sound that might have been contentment, might have been recognition. Her tiny hand found my finger again, that same desperate grip that Emma used to have, the same trust that I'd failed to protect once before. I lifted the necklace carefully, feeling the weight of it. Real diamonds, no question. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each link perfectly formed, each stone flawlessly set. But it was the seal that held my attention. the House of Valdres. I'd written a paper on them in college, back when I thought I might become a history teacher instead of running into burning buildings for a living. They'd been minor European royalty, wiped out during the war when the Nazis systematically eliminated anyone who might challenge their puppet governments, or so the history books claimed. But history books could be wrong. History books didn't account for hidden heirs, for royal bloodlines preserved in secret, for the kind of generational planning that powerful families were capable of when survival was at stake. And they certainly didn't account for why someone would go to such lengths to murder a 6-month-old baby who should have been nothing more than another tragic casualty of a house fire. My laptop was buried under 3 years of dust, but it still worked. I started searching, cross-referencing the Valdres family with recent news, with property records, with anything that might explain how their royal seal had ended up around the neck of a baby in a burning mansion in suburban Connecticut. What I found made my blood run cold. The internet rabbit hole I fell into that night would have been fascinating under different circumstances. Now it felt like digging my own grave, one search result at a time. The House of Valdres hadn't just been minor European royalty. They'd been guardians of something much more valuable than titles or territory. They'd been the keepers of what historians called the Meridian Trust, a collection of assets, properties, and investments that had been accumulating value for over 3 centuries. Conservative estimates put the trust's current worth at somewhere north of $12 billion. Emma, my Emma, the one sleeping peacefully in the carrier beside me, wasn't just wearing expensive jewelry. She was wearing the key to one of the largest private fortunes in the world. And if the genealogical records I was finding were accurate, she might be the only living heir with legitimate claim to it all. But legitimate heirs have a way of dying young when that much money is at stake. The Whitmore family, whose estate had burned tonight, appeared in the records as trustees of various Valdres holdings, financial guardians, managing assets for a bloodline they believed had ended decades ago. But what if it hadn't? What if some member of the family had survived, had children, had passed down not just DNA, but the proof of that lineage in the form of a necklace that was never supposed to see daylight? My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "We know what you have. We know where you are. Return what doesn't belong to you, and the child lives." I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then read it again when it lit up. They'd found me already. 3 hours, not 6. Somehow they'd tracked me down, figured out what I'd done, and made their intentions crystal clear. The child lives. Not "we'll let you live," not "no one gets hurt," just "the child lives," with the clear implication that I wouldn't be part of that equation. I looked at the baby, still sleeping with that same peaceful expression, completely unaware that her existence had just painted a target on both our backs. 3 people had already died protecting her secret. The Whitmores and whoever else had been in that house tonight, they'd chosen death over revealing what they knew about this child's identity. But they'd failed. The secret was out now, literally wearing itself around the neck of a 6-month-old who had no idea she was worth more money than most small countries possessed. And the people who'd spent decades managing that fortune, who'd grown comfortable treating it as their own, weren't going to let a baby's inconvenient survival claim upset their carefully constructed world. Another text appeared. "You have 1 hour." 1 hour to do what? Run? Hide? Hand over a baby to people who'd already proven they were willing to commit murder to protect their interests? I thought about my training, about all the protocols designed to keep first responders safe in dangerous situations. None of them covered what to do when you'd accidentally stolen the richest baby in the world from people who wanted her dead. I thought about Emma, my Emma, the daughter I'd failed to save, and how she'd looked at me with that same trusting gaze. How I'd promised to protect her and failed. How I'd spent 3 years drowning in guilt over choices I'd made and chances I'd missed. This baby deserved better than another man who made promises he couldn't keep. But maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to prove that some promises were worth dying for. Have you ever held a secret so dangerous that knowing it changed everything about your life? What would you risk to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves? I spent 47 minutes of that hour doing something I hadn't done since Emma died. I prayed. Not the desperate, bargaining kind of prayer I'd tried during those endless hospital nights, but something quieter, more resigned. A conversation with whatever force in the universe decided that broken firefighters and orphaned babies should find each other in the ruins of burning mansions. The baby woke up hungry. I didn't have formula, didn't have diapers, didn't have any of the 1,000 things that tiny humans needed to stay alive. What I had was a growing certainty that the people texting me wouldn't hesitate to solve their problem permanently if I handed her over. They'd had 3 years to find and eliminate this inconvenient heir. Tonight's fire wasn't meant to be a rescue operation. It was meant to be a funeral. 13 minutes left. I wrapped her in my old academy sweatshirt, the one I'd worn during training 15 years ago when I still believed that saving people was a simple matter of courage and commitment. Before I learned that sometimes the people you save don't want to be saved, and sometimes the ones you can't save haunt every quiet moment afterward. The house felt different with her in it, alive somehow. Like all the empty rooms were finally remembering their purpose. I carried her upstairs to what used to be Emma's nursery, the room I'd kept locked for 3 years because opening that door felt like reopening a wound that had never properly healed. 8 minutes. The nursery was exactly as we'd left it. Crib still assembled, mobile still hanging motionless above where Emma used to sleep. 3 years of dust coating everything like snow, preserving a moment in time that was supposed to last forever, but barely lasted 6 months. I set the baby down in the crib, and for a surreal moment, it was like time had folded in on itself. Like Emma had never died, like Sarah had never left, like I'd never spent 3 years learning that guilt could be a full-time occupation. But this wasn't Emma. This baby had her own story, her own claim to life, her own right to grow up and make choices, and maybe even forgive the adults who'd failed to protect her parents. She deserved better than being used as a pawn in someone else's chess game. She deserved better than another father figure who'd already proven he couldn't keep the promises that mattered most. 4 minutes. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo. Danny, my partner, sitting in what looked like the back of a van. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, and there was fear in his eyes that I'd never seen before, not even during the worst calls we'd worked together. The message underneath was simple. The hour is up. They had Danny. These people, whoever they were, whatever organization had grown fat and comfortable managing a dead royal family's fortune, had somehow grabbed my partner, the only person in the world who might have realized what I'd done and covered for me. Danny, who had 3 kids and a wife who still kissed him goodbye every morning. Danny, who'd never hurt anyone in his life except in defense of others. Now I understood the real choice they were offering me. It wasn't the baby's life versus mine. It was the baby's life versus Danny's life. 2 innocent people, and I could only save one. The same impossible choice I'd faced 3 years ago when work had pulled me away from Emma the night she needed me most. The same choice that had cost me everything I thought I was living for. But this time, I wasn't the same man who'd made that choice. This time, I'd already lost everything that mattered. This time, I had nothing left to lose except the chance to prove that some promises were worth keeping, even when keeping them destroyed you. Especially then. I picked up my phone and typed back, "I'm coming, but I'm bringing her with me." The address they texted me was an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of place where screams got swallowed by distance and indifference. I'd been to similar locations on emergency calls, drug overdoses, accidents involving heavy machinery, the occasional body that had been dumped there because nobody important would miss it for months. Tonight, I was driving towards becoming one of those bodies. Emma, I couldn't stop calling her Emma, couldn't stop thinking of her as mine, even though I'd known her for less than 12 hours, made soft sounds from the car seat I'd borrowed from next door. Mrs. Patterson had asked questions I couldn't answer, but she'd seen the look on my face and handed over the seat anyway. Some things transcended explanation, and a man holding a baby with desperate tenderness was one of them. The warehouse district looked like a graveyard for American industry. Empty buildings with broken windows stared at each other across potholed streets that the city had stopped maintaining years ago. This was where dreams came to die, where people came to make the kind of choices that left permanent stains on their souls. I parked outside Building 47, a concrete monstrosity that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd given up on the idea that buildings should inspire anything other than despair. 2 black SUVs were already there, engines running, exhaust creating ghost clouds in the December air. Professional, organized, the kind of people who'd made murder into a business plan. I lifted Emma from the car seat, feeling her tiny weight against my chest. She looked up at me with those impossible blue eyes, and for a moment I saw my future differently. Saw myself teaching her to ride a bike, walking her down aisles at graduation ceremonies, maybe even giving her away at a wedding someday. All the moments I'd been robbed of with my first Emma, all the possibilities that existed as long as this child kept breathing. But futures were luxury items, and I couldn't afford them anymore. The warehouse door opened before I could knock. A woman stepped out, mid-50s, expensive coat, the kind of polished competence that came from decades of making other people's problems disappear. Behind her, I could see Danny tied to a chair under harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look like a crime scene. "Captain Morrison," she said, and her voice had the flat efficiency of someone reading a grocery list. "You've caused us considerable inconvenience." "Let my partner go," I said. "This is between you and me." She smiled, the kind of expression that never reached her eyes. "Nothing is between you and us, Captain. You're collateral damage in a much larger story. The child is what matters here." "She's 6 months old." "She's $12 billion in legal claims," the woman corrected. "She's disruption to carefully maintained systems. She's chaos in a world that requires order." She gestured to the baby in my arms. "She's a problem that needs to be solved." I looked past her to Danny, who was trying to tell me something with his eyes, probably trying to tell me to run, to save myself, to choose self-preservation over heroic gestures. Danny had always been the practical one in our partnership. He understood that dead heroes couldn't save anyone. But I'd tried practical once before. I'd tried choosing the safe option, the reasonable response, the path that protected my own interests first. That choice had cost me my daughter, my marriage, and 3 years of sleepless nights wondering what would have happened if I'd just stayed home that one night, if I'd just been there when Emma needed me most. I wouldn't make that choice again. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You're going to let Danny go. You're going to walk away from this baby, and you're going to find another way to manage your little financial empire that doesn't involve murdering children." The woman's smile widened. "Or?" I looked down at Emma, who was still watching my face with that trusting gaze, still believing that adults were capable of keeping the promises they made to protect her. "Or I prove that some things are worth more than money. When you're faced with choosing between what's practical and what's right, what voice do you listen to? Have you ever had to decide whether some principles are worth risking everything for?" The woman, she never gave me her name, as if names were another luxury she couldn't afford, gestured to 2 men who emerged from the shadows of the warehouse. They moved like soldiers, all controlled efficiency and suppressed violence. The kind of people who'd learned that hesitation could be fatal, that mercy was a weakness that got you killed. "Last chance, Captain," she said. "Hand over the child and your partner lives. Continue this misguided heroism and you both become unfortunate casualties of an industrial accident."
Danny was shaking his head frantically now, trying to tell me something I couldn't hear, but understood anyway. Save yourself. Take the baby and run. Don't throw your life away for someone who's already dead. But that was the thing about promises made to children. They didn't care about practicality or odds or the reasonable voice in your head that calculated survival percentages. They only cared about whether you were the kind of person who meant what you said when you said you'd protect them. I'd failed that test once. I wouldn't fail it again. There's something you need to understand about firefighters, I told the woman, shifting Emma slightly in my arms so I could reach the device I'd clipped to my belt before leaving the house. We don't go into burning buildings because we think we're going to survive. We go in because someone needs saving, and that's more important than our own safety. Her expression didn't change, but I saw one of her men tense, recognizing something in my voice that she'd missed.
The thing is, I continued, I didn't just steal this baby tonight. I also borrowed some equipment from the station. I held up the device, a small, innocuous-looking cylinder that most people wouldn't recognize. But anyone with military or emergency response training would know exactly what it was. A thermite grenade, the kind of thing we used for emergency metal cutting when conventional tools weren't enough. The kind of thing that burned at over 4,000 degrees and couldn't be extinguished with water. "That's a bluff," the woman said, but her voice had lost some of its flat certainty. "Maybe," I agreed. "But here's what I know about you people. You've spent years building a careful, quiet system for managing stolen money. You've gotten comfortable operating in the shadows, making problems disappear without attracting attention. The last thing you want is a spectacular public incident that brings federal investigators crawling all over your operation." I looked at the concrete walls around us, at the old chemical stains on the floor, at all the evidence of industrial processes that had probably violated half a dozen environmental regulations. This place burns down tonight with all of us in it, and the investigation that follows is going to turn over every rock you've been hiding under, every shell company, every hidden account, every death you've arranged to protect your secrets. Emma made a soft sound, almost like she was agreeing with me. The woman's eyes flicked to the baby, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold calculation there, something that might have been uncertainty. "You're willing to die for a child you've known for 12 hours?" she asked. I thought about that question, really considered it. Was I? Was I ready to end my life for this baby who shared nothing with me except blue eyes and terrible timing? Was I prepared to sacrifice Danny's life too, to gamble everything on the chance that these people cared more about maintaining their careful invisibility than they did about eliminating witnesses? Then Emma looked up at me again with that trusting gaze, and I remembered something Sarah had said during one of our last fights, before the grief and blame had poisoned everything between us. She'd said that the worst part about losing Emma wasn't the death itself. It was knowing that our daughter had died believing her father would save her, and he'd simply chosen not to be there. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I am." The woman studied my face for a long moment, probably calculating odds and weighing risks and trying to determine if I was bluffing about the grenade, about my willingness to use it, about whether a broken firefighter really had the courage to turn himself into a human torch for a principle. Finally, she nodded to her men. They cut Danny loose. Danny stumbled toward me, his hands still marked with rope burns. His eyes wide with the kind of shock that came from staring death in the face and somehow walking away. But instead of relief, I felt the cold weight of realization settling in my chest. This wasn't over. This was just the woman calculating that dead martyrs attracted more attention than live ones, that sometimes the most effective way to solve a problem was to let it think it had won. "We're walking away," I told her, backing toward the warehouse door with Emma still in my arms. "All three of us, and you're going to let us." She nodded, but her smile had returned, the kind of expression that suggested she knew something I didn't. "Of course, Captain, you've made your point quite eloquently. The child can live." Danny grabbed my arm as we reached the door. "Jake, this is too easy. "I know," I said quietly,
but we're going anyway. Because sometimes the trap is so obvious that walking into it becomes the only honest choice. Because sometimes you know the game is rigged, but you play it anyway, hoping that courage can tip the odds just enough to matter. We made it to my truck, got Emma secured in the borrowed car seat, drove 3 blocks before the first bullet shattered my rear window. They'd followed us, of course. Professional killers didn't just give up because their target had shown backbone. They adapted, they planned, they found another way to complete the job. What they'd given us in that warehouse wasn't mercy, it was a head start. "Floor it," Danny shouted, but I was already pushing the accelerator down, my old truck protesting as we took corners at speeds that would have been reckless under normal circumstances. Behind us, the black SUVs followed with the patient persistence of predators who knew their prey was already exhausted. Emma started crying, not the soft sounds she'd been making before, but the kind of wailing that came from genuine terror, from a 6-month-old's primal understanding that the adults who were supposed to protect her were failing spectacularly at their job. "Where are we going?" Danny asked, checking the mirrors as more bullets sparked off the truck's frame. That was the question, wasn't it? Where did you run when the people chasing you had unlimited resources and no moral boundaries? Where did you hide a baby whose existence threatened a $12 billion criminal enterprise? Where did 2 small-town firefighters find safety when they'd accidentally stumbled into a war between old money and older secrets? "The station," I said, taking a hard right onto Maple Street. "If we can get to the station—" Another bullet took out my side mirror. In the distance, I could hear sirens. Whether coming to help us or help our pursuers, I couldn't tell. In a world where that much money was at stake, anyone could be bought, anyone could be turned, anyone could become another obstacle instead of an ally.
But the fire station was different. Fire stations were sacred ground, neutral territory where politics and money and personal grudges got left at the door because lives were at stake. My crew would protect this baby not because they understood the larger implications of her survival, but because protecting innocence was what we did. It was written into our DNA, trained into our reflexes, sworn into our oaths. It was who we were when everything else got stripped away. The station came into view just as my engine started smoking from whatever damage the bullets had done to my truck's vital systems. I could see lights on in the bay, could make out familiar figures moving around Engine 47. My crew, my family. The people who'd carried me through the worst 3 years of my life without asking questions or demanding explanations. The people I was about to put in mortal danger because I'd made promises I couldn't keep any other way. Danny was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, part admiration, part terror, part resignation. "You know they'll follow us in there," he said. "You know this doesn't end just because we reach safe ground." I looked at Emma in the rearview mirror, still crying, still trusting that somehow the adults in her life would figure out how to keep her alive despite all evidence to the contrary. "I know," I said, pulling into the station as the black SUVs rounded the corner behind us. "But maybe it's time to stop running." The fire station at 2:30 a.m. was a cathedral of controlled chaos. Engine 47 gleamed under the fluorescent lights, freshly serviced and ready for whatever emergency might drag us from sleep. Lieutenant Rodriguez was checking equipment, probably unable to sleep after the call to the Whitmore Estate. Marcus and Tommy were playing cards at the kitchen table, their conversation dying when they saw me burst through the bay doors, carrying a baby and trailing Danny like we were refugees from a war zone. "Jesus, Morrison," Rodriguez said, taking in our appearance, my soot-stained clothes, Danny's rope burns, the baby crying in my arms. "What the hell?" "We need help," I said simply. "People are trying to kill this child, and we're the only thing standing between them and murder." It was the kind of statement that should have prompted questions, demands for explanation, maybe even calls to supervisors who could handle situations beyond the scope of routine emergency response. Instead, Rodriguez just nodded and started moving toward the equipment lockers. "How many?" he asked. "At least 6. Professional, armed. They'll be here in about 30 seconds. Marcus and Tommy were already on their feet, the card game forgotten. This was what I'd counted on. The brotherhood that meant when one firefighter said innocents were in danger, you didn't ask for paperwork or protocol, you asked what needed to be done. "Rodriguez, get on the radio. Tell dispatch we have an active shooter situation. Request immediate police backup. Marcus, kill the bay lights and lock down the station. Tommy, grab the medical kit and check the baby."
Tommy reached for Emma, and for a moment, I couldn't let go. 3 hours ago, this child had been a stranger. Now she felt like everything I had left in the world, the only promise I'd made that still mattered. But Tommy had kids of his own, understood the weight of that responsibility, and his hands were gentle as he lifted her from my arms. "She's okay, Morrison," he said quietly. "Scared, but okay. What's this about?" Before I could answer, the front windows of the station exploded inward. The attack was swift and professional, suppressed weapons, coordinated entry points, the kind of tactical precision that suggested military training and unlimited funding. They'd come to retrieve property they considered stolen, and they clearly didn't care how many firefighters died in the process. Rodriguez dove behind engine 47 as bullets sparked off the truck's chrome bumper. Marcus had made it to the radio but went down hard, blood spreading across his uniform from a shoulder wound that looked bad even in the dim light. The baby started screaming again, and Tommy curled his body around her like a human shield, protecting her with the same instinct that made him run into burning buildings for strangers. This was my fault, my choice, my promise that had put good men in mortal danger because I couldn't let go of a child I'd known for half a day. But watching Tommy shield Emma with his own body, seeing Rodriguez return fire to protect innocents he'd never met before tonight, I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. I wasn't the only one who made promises to protect people. This was what we all did, what we'd all sworn to do. The uniforms weren't just clothing. They were commitments to stand between danger and the defenseless, even when doing so meant risking everything we had to lose. Especially then. "Danny!" I shouted over the gunfire. "The thermite!" He understood immediately, pulling the grenade from my belt and moving toward the station's main support beam. If we couldn't stop them from taking Emma, we could at least make sure the whole world knew what had happened here. A fire station collapsing in mysterious circumstances would bring federal investigators, media attention, the kind of scrutiny that $12 billion criminal enterprises couldn't survive. But as Danny reached the beam, one of the attackers got a clear shot. My partner, the man who'd covered for me, trusted me, followed me into this impossible situation, dropped to his knees, clutching his chest as blood spread between his fingers. The thermite grenade rolled across the concrete floor, coming to rest just out of reach. Time slowed to the crystalline clarity that comes in moments of absolute crisis. I could see Tommy still protecting Emma, could hear Rodriguez calling for backup that might not arrive in time, could see Marcus trying to apply pressure to his own wound while reaching for his sidearm. I could see the attackers moving methodically through the station, professional killers eliminating obstacles between them and their target. And I could see Danny looking at me with eyes that held no blame, no regret, only the quiet understanding that some sacrifices were worth making for the right reasons. What happened next existed in that space between seconds where heroes are made and legends are born. Danny, bleeding out on the concrete floor of Station 47, looked up at the lead attacker with the same expression he'd worn during our worst calls. Calm, determined, ready to do whatever it took to save lives. The thermite grenade in his hand wasn't aimed at the support beam anymore. It was aimed at the attackers themselves, close enough that the 4,000-degree burn would take them all down together, close enough that their deaths would leave evidence, witnesses, questions that $12 billion couldn't answer away. "Danny, no!" I screamed. but he was already pulling the pin. Time stretched like taffy. The lead attacker spun toward Danny, weapon raised. Tommy curled tighter around Emma, protecting her from what was coming. Rodriguez dove for better cover behind Engine 47, and I found myself moving without conscious thought, driven by the same instinct that had carried me into burning buildings for 15 years. I threw myself between Danny and the attackers just as the grenade detonated. The explosion wasn't like the movies. No dramatic fireball, no cinematic slow motion, just intense, immediate heat that turned metal into liquid and concrete into powder. The kind of heat that consumed everything it touched without mercy or discrimination. The kind of heat I'd spent my career dancing around, respecting, surviving. But this time, I wasn't trying to survive it. I was trying to absorb it, to use my body as a shield between the thermite's fury and the people I'd sworn to protect. For Emma, who deserved to grow up and make her own choices about the fortune she'd inherited. For Tommy, who had kids at home who needed their father. For Rodriguez and Marcus, who'd put their lives on the line because I'd asked them to. For Danny, who'd already given everything. The heat hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and turning my gear into molten torture. I could smell my own flesh burning, could feel my skin blistering and peeling away from muscle and bone. But I could also hear something else over the roar of the thermite. Silence. No more gunfire. No more tactical commands. No more professional killers moving through my station like they owned it. When the fire department arrived 15 minutes later, my own brothers and sisters responding to Rodriguez's call for backup, they found a scene that would make headlines across the country. A fire station partially collapsed from what investigators would eventually determine was a thermite explosion. 6 bodies, all carrying military-grade weapons and identification that traced back to shell companies connected to international money laundering. And in the middle of it all, they found me. 3rd-degree burns covering 60% of my body, barely clinging to life. Still conscious enough to whisper one word over and over again. Emma. They found her too, still in Tommy's arms, both of them protected by Engine 47's bulk from the worst of the explosion. Scared, crying, but alive. The diamond necklace around her neck caught the emergency lights like a promise that some things were worth any price. The investigation that followed was everything I'd hoped for and more. Federal agents, international law enforcement, forensic accountants who specialized in tracking money through decades of carefully constructed lies. The Meridian Trust was exposed, its stolen billions frozen, its network of enablers and enforcers rounded up in coordinated raids across 3 continents. Emma, the real Emma, my Emma, the daughter fate had given me in the ruins of the Whitmore Estate, was safe. Not just from the immediate threat of assassination, but from the systematic greed that had cost her parents their lives. But safety came with a price. As I lay in the burn unit, wrapped in bandages and sustained by machines, I knew I'd never hold her again. Never see her take her first steps or hear her say her first words. The thermite that had saved her life had cost me the chance to be part of hers. Some promises, I realized, you keep by letting go. 6 months later, I watched Emma take her first steps from my wheelchair in the rehabilitation center's garden. She was living with Tommy and his family now, good people who understood that love wasn't about biology or blood, but about showing up when someone needed you most. The burns had healed as well as they ever would, leaving me alive but fundamentally changed, like metal tempered in fire until it became something both stronger and more brittle than before. The legal proceedings were finally wrapping up. Emma's claim to the Valdres inheritance had been validated by courts in 12 countries. Her parents' deaths ruled homicides, their killers either dead or facing life sentences. The money, all 12 billion of it, had been placed in trust, managed by people who understood that some fortunes came with blood on them, who were committed to using that wealth to prevent other children from becoming targets. Emma wouldn't need to worry about money. She'd grow up with every advantage, every opportunity, every door already opened for her by the sacrifice of people who'd chosen her future over their own safety. But she'd also grow up without knowing the man who'd pulled her from the flames, who'd risked everything to keep promises he'd made to a child he'd known for barely 12 hours.
Some days, that felt like the cruelest irony of all. I'd saved Emma to redeem my failure to save my first daughter, but in saving her, I'd lost the chance to be her father. The thermite that had protected her from her enemies had also protected her from me, from my guilt, my grief, my desperate need to replace what I'd lost with something precious and new. But watching her now, seeing her laugh as Tommy's daughter pushed her on the swing set, seeing the way she looked at her new family with absolute trust and joy, I understood something that had taken me 3 years of darkness to learn. Love wasn't about possession. It wasn't about filling the empty spaces inside yourself with other people's light. Love was about making choices that put someone else's happiness above your own comfort, their future above your past, their safety above your need to be needed. I'd loved my first Emma by trying to save everyone except her. I'd loved this Emma by saving her from me. Tommy visited every week, bringing pictures and stories and the kind of updates that fathers shared with each other. Emma was walking now, talking in the way that 18-month-olds talked, all enthusiasm and perfect mispronunciation. She called him Daddy and his wife Mama, and that was exactly how it should be. Some children got the parents they were born to. Others got the parents they needed. Emma had gotten both, the father who died protecting her identity and the father who'd lived to give her a family. "She asks about you sometimes," Tommy said during one visit, settling into the chair beside my wheelchair. "Not in words, obviously, but she looks at firefighters differently than other people, like she remembers something important about uniforms and sirens and men who smell like smoke." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Some memories live deeper than language, older than thought. Maybe she'd carry something of that night with her, not the terror or the violence, but the knowledge that when darkness came, there were people who'd stand between her and harm, even when standing cost them everything. "Thank you," I told Tommy, and meant it for more than just the weekly visits. "Thank you for taking her home. Thank you for loving her like your own. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is accept responsibility for someone else's sacrifice. Thank you for giving me the chance to keep a promise by letting it go." As the sun set behind the rehabilitation center's trees, painting the sky in shades of fire and hope, I thought about Emma Morrison, both of them, the daughter I'd lost and the daughter I'd saved. About Danny, who died protecting innocence because that was who he was. About the choices we make when everything else gets stripped away, and all that's left is the decision between courage and comfort. Some promises you keep by holding on. Others you keep by letting go. The hardest ones require both. Holding on long enough to make the sacrifice meaningful, letting go completely enough to make the sacrifice real. I kept my promise to Emma by losing the right to be her father, but in losing that, I'd gained something else, the knowledge that love could survive any fire, even the ones we set ourselves to burn away, everything that didn't matter. Even the ones that left us scarred, but somehow, finally, whole. If this story touched something in your heart, if you've ever faced impossible choices or found hope in the darkest places, please hit that like button to let me know this journey meant something to you. Share your thoughts in the comments about sacrifice, love, and the promises we make that change us forever. And if you believe that some stories need to be told, that some truths are worth the pain of hearing them, please subscribe and ring that bell. Because there are more stories out there about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And maybe, just maybe, we all need to remember that heroes aren't born in fire. They're forged by the choices they make when no one is watching. Thank you for listening to Emma's story. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the greatest love looks like letting go.
And thank you for believing that broken people can still keep unbreakable promises. Until next time, remember, some flames destroy, but others illuminate the path toward who we're meant to become.